Before we get into today's stories, I want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Zach. A lot of the stories I cover start with something small, like a feeling you brush off or a detail you tell yourself isn't important. And honestly, that's not too different from how a lot of us treat our own health, like a weird pain or just the mental stress of knowing you probably should see a doctor, but putting it off anyway. I caught myself doing the same thing, telling myself I'd deal with it, read more tomorrow. That's when I used ZacDoc, and it actually made the whole process painless. ZacDoc is a free website that lets you search for in-network doctors, compare them by specialty, see real appointment availability, and book instantly. In many cases, you can get in within just a couple of days. You can read verified patient reviews, check out doctor profiles, and choose someone you're genuinely comfortable with no awkward phone calls. What I loved was being able to find a doctor who had next read more day availability and reviews that specifically mentioned listening and taking patients seriously. That matters because walking into an appointment already feels stressful enough. So if you've been avoiding a doctor's visit or just want an easier way to find someone you actually trust, head over to zadoc.com/mrnightmare and see what's available in your area. It only takes a few clicks. I went camping alone last winter with my dog Roscoe, and it's something I'll never do again. I had taken a few days off, read more work, and wanted to get away from people. I loaded my truck with my gear and drove up a long, narrow trail that cut deep into a state forest. Music. The road was barely maintained, covered in packed snow and ice, and there were no other cars anywhere. After driving for almost an hour, I parked at a small pull-off that looked like it hadn't been used in a long time. From there, I hiked another 20 minutes with my pack and Roscoe until I reached a small clearing surrounded by thick trees. The snow was red more deep and untouched. There were no footprints or signs of anyone else being around recently. That was what I wanted. I set my pack down, cleared a spot for a tent, and let Roscoe wander around while I worked. He stayed close, sniffing the snow in the trees and just jumping around playing. I pitched the tent, staked it down hard because the ground was frozen, and laid out my sleeping pad and winter-rated sleeping bag inside. I knew it was going to be a cold night, well below freezing, so I layered Redmore properly. Thermal base layers, thick socks, a fleece, and a heavy jacket stayed on even after camp was set. Once the tent was ready, I gathered dead wood and built a small fire pit. I started a fire and let it burn down until I had a steady flame. I cooked dinner over it, just a simple meal, and sat on a log eating while Roscoe lay near the fire. The woods were quiet in that deep winter way where sound feels almost non-existent. I learned a long time ago from my dad that snow actually absorbs sound. Read more. After I ate, Roscoe suddenly stood up and started barking toward the trees. It didn't concern me at first. Deer were everywhere out there, and he had barked at them before. I told him to relax, and he did after a minute, sitting back down. I checked the time and decided I'd stay up a bit longer by the fire before turning in. I always carried a handgun when camping in remote places, and it was holstered at my side like it always was. I felt fine at that point. About 20 minutes later, Roscoe started Redmore, barking again, louder this time. Then I heard it too, footsteps moving through the snow somewhere out in the woods. I stood up and listened. The steps stopped, then started again. Roscoe went from barking to growling, then suddenly went silent. He stood staring straight ahead toward the trees. That was when I felt uneasy. I followed his gaze and saw a shape at the edge of the tree line. Someone was standing there, half hidden in the darkness, just barely lit by the fire. I called out saying that he scared Redmore me and telling Roscoe it was okay. The figure didn't move at first. Then he stepped forward slightly enough for me to see that it was a man. He asked what I was doing out there that deep in the woods. His tone wasn't friendly. I told him I was just getting out into nature with my dog. He didn't respond right away. He just stood there watching me. I could feel the situation turning wrong. I told him calmly that I was armed. The man slightly laughed and said something about me threatening him instead of Redmore, inviting him to join me, and asked where my hospitality was. Then he turned and walked back into the darkness, his footsteps fading into the woods. I stood there for a long time after that, staring at the trees. Roscoe stayed close to me. I didn't like any of it, but eventually I told myself he was gone. I put out the fire carefully, throwing snow on it and stirring the ashes until there was nothing left that could glow. I didn't want light drawing attention. I crawled into my tent and sealed it up. Read more inside. I did everything I could to stay warm. I laid my sleeping pad down to keep the cold ground from draining heat from my body. I stayed fully dressed, pulled on a knit hat, and cinched my sleeping bag tight around my shoulders. I kept a hand warmer near my core and another near my feet. Roscoe curled up next to me, his body heat helping more than anything. I lay there listening to the woods, or rather the extreme silence. After a while, Roscoe started growling again. Then I heard what he was growling, read more at. Footsteps in the snow. They stopped and Roscoe quieted, but his ears were still perked up. Then the footsteps started again, closer this time and slower than before. They came right up to the tent and stopped. Roscoe began howling loudly. I whispered for him to stop, terrified of drawing attention. When he did stop, he went back to growling. Whoever it was just stood outside the tent. I could hear subtle movement like the shift of weight in the snow. I had my gun in my hand now, but I didn't want to make threats. I didn't read more want to be forced to follow through with the threats. I have never actually shot anyone, and I don't think I have it in me to kill someone, even in self-defense. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I cocked the gun and said clearly that I had a gun and that whoever was there needed to leave now. But realistically, who else could it have been besides that creepy guy from before? There was silence for a few seconds. Then I heard footsteps again, moving away from the tent. Slowly at first, then faster, read more before disappearing into the woods. I didn't unzip the tent to look out. I stayed frozen for hours. Roscoe stayed alert the entire time, which was the only reason I even felt remotely comfortable eventually nodding off. I certainly wouldn't have if I were alone. I barely slept, drifting off only in short bursts. When the sky finally began to lighten, I packed up as fast as I could at the crack of dawn. We hiked back to my truck and drove away. I never went back to that part of the woods again, and I read more never will. Creeps like that guy really make life scary sometimes and remind you that you can never really let your guard down. July 4th weekend in 2025. I drove from Melbourne, Florida to Charleston, South Carolina to visit a good friend named Mark I hadn't seen in years. He was there on an internship for his law program and staying in a house in the city. I was visiting for the weekend and spending the night downstairs on a couch by some windows. After a smooth drive, I arrived in Charleston and we played some pickleball before nightfall. When the night settled in, I went back downstairs to the couch by the windows that faced another apartment building and a small labyrinth of alleyways with an abandoned house across the street. The next day, after playing more pickleball in the morning and hanging out, we went to the main Charleston market. We walked through it and eventually came out near the docks by the water. That's when we saw him. A man in a wedding suit was shambling down the road near the water. He wore a crisp bow tie and clean Redmore dress shoes, and his suit looked freshly pressed. He had long black curly hair and a tan complexion. The market behind us was loud and busy. Yet this man moved alone across the street with a slow, detached movement. He didn't notice us and seemed to be in his own world. If we crossed the street, we would have walked straight into him. Instinctively, I wanted to avoid him. I grabbed Mark by the arm and told him we were not crossing. We walked to the right, deeper into the city, and picked up our pace. He was moving slowly, so we Redmore created distance easily. I told Mark it was strange and that the guy didn't look homeless. His clothes were too clean, too crisp. Something about him felt wrong, Mark agreed. We kept walking for a while. A few streets later on, another busy stretch of Charleston, we looked toward a shop and saw him again. That same man with the same shambling movement. He was far down the street, diagonal to us, moving at the same slow pace. Somehow he caught up to us, even though there was no clear way he could have reached that spot Redmore without us seeing him. I pointed him out to Mark, and we both stared. It made no sense. He was in a completely different part of the city, but moving exactly the same way. We pushed it aside and kept exploring Charleston. The next day was July 4th, and that night we watched the fireworks on an island about 20 minutes from the city. By then, we had mostly